organisations are at different points in their accessibility maturity journey, and that's okay. So today I've got the pleasure of hosting a panel discussion with two brilliant accessibility design leaders from two different organisations. And because their organisations are at different stages in that accessibility journey, they've both been facing different internal challenges in terms of getting buy-in from those organisations and encouraging adoption and people being aware of that. So we'll be talking to them today more about those experiences, what lessons they've learned along the way, and how we can best think about how we influence organisations that we're working with to buy into accessibility and how they've been bringing accessibility to the forefront. So I'm Jane, and I am an experience lead here at Inviqa. I'm really excited to be hosting today's panel with our two guests. So let me introduce them. So we have the wonderful Brandy Bora, Director Experience Designer at Verizon, and the equally wonderful Hepburn, an accessibility lead at Skyscanner. So before we jump into things, it'd be great to get you to both introduce yourselves for yourselves. So yeah, Brandy, tell us quickly about yourself and your role at Verizon.
Yeah, I'm Brandy. I'm a design director at Verizon. Verizon's one of America's larger telecommunications companies. I've been there for about 5 years and was a consultant for many years before that. And one of my many different roles as a design director there is to ensure that the designs that we create and present to our users are accessible for all of our users. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Brandy. Heather, tell us a bit about you, tell us about your current role.
Sure. Hey, I'm Heather Hepburn. I'm the accessibility lead at Skyscanner. We're an online travel brand, and we help travelers all over the world find flights, hotels, and cars to hire. And I've been there for 3 years. I've been running the accessibility program now for about 2 years. So I started there as a UX writer. I was not a designer, a writer, and quickly realized that we were not in the best place when it came to accessibility. So wanted to do something about it. So managed to kick off a program, and yeah, here we are.
Brilliant, great. So we've got a few different things that we want to cover and talk to you both about today to hear about your experiences. So to begin with, again, just to ask you both, Heather, I'll go to you this time first. How would you kind of describe your organisation's accessibility maturity, and what's been your role in shaping it to this point?
Sure. So I guess the level of maturity. So we've been going 2 years, and I feel that we're actually in a pretty good place. We've raised heaps of awareness across the business. So we've done lots of training, and we've got an accessibility hub that's available to everybody. The products are in a much more accessible place than they were a couple of years ago, that's for sure. Still a challenge to really embed those best practices into what we do all through the product life cycle. So from research, design, content writing, and build, all the way through. So many improvements, but still I would say a long way to go to really embed it properly into the culture. But I would say something about maturity. I've just recently, actually, in fact, maybe it was just yesterday, received the digital accessibility maturity model, the online version of that from AbilityNet. They wanted me to have a wee look over it. So it's up there and free, and it's a really good tool. And other companies do it as well, but this is a free thing that you can do to find out where you sit in terms of maturity, and it actually also gives you really good tips on how to get to that next level. And it's a big range. So really interesting to plot yourself on that graph and see what you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you've mentioned that resource. I guess seeing it in that kind of in a sort of a systematic way, how did you find trying to score yourself and Skyscanner against that?
It's hard. It's really, really hard. It breaks it down into kind of different key areas like vision and leadership and capability. So I think for us, like some areas we were doing really, really well in, and then others like really not. So I guess it kind of gives you the right things to focus on. It's hard, but most places that do that will give you tips on how to actually get to that next level, and it's really worthwhile having a look at that, actually.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a really clear kind of action plan that you can build.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
brilliant.
One that you can keep coming back to as well every 6 months or every year, and you're trying to just keep progressing through the levels.
Definitely. definitely. Yeah, I can totally see that. Brandy, yeah, how about yourself? Tell us a bit more about the accessibility to maturity and what's going on at Verizon. And again, yeah, how have you been involved in shaping that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a team and a discipline, we're entering maturity now. But some of our practices are pretty lopsided. We have like areas where we are doing really well. And then we have areas that are still, nascent. We're in the middle of a rebrand at the moment. So we're trying to use this opportunity to even ourselves out a bit, like where we're deficient. So like to be specific about that, we've got some core areas in our like OS compliance where we're, just not accessible. Screen readers aren't able to pick us up in some areas. And we've got some patterns that we use that are just, like perennially like broken from a technical perspective. But then on the design side, we're entering maturity where we've built a culture now where designers ask questions and have their work reviewed regularly and are proactive in making sure that the experiences that they draw are more inclusive, or the ones that they write, or the ones that they're omni-channel and we're trying to put into the world are considerate of all of our different users. And that to me is like the most important part of it. Is where we're starting to reach maturity, is that culturally we're open to the question and having conversations really, really early. However, we do still have, technical challenges that we're working through, and resourcing challenges mostly that are related to those technical challenges. It's not like we, don't know how to write code or make things compliant. It's that it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and dedication and constant rigor and monitoring to ensure that experiences, once they're delivered and are accessible, continue to be accessible as changes in the OS occur. And that's what's also really interesting about just working in software in general. You have to like maintain the things that you make, and everything is constantly moving and changing and shifting. Nothing is really static. So the things that you make and you deliver, the experience might be pleasurable for like a moment in time, but the minute you ship it, it starts to change or degrade. So you have to continue to like maintain while you produce new experiences.
Yeah, definitely. I think from what you're saying there, it really sounds like it's again, almost like a design process. It's an iterative process. How do we make sure that we keep optimizing on those ways of working and embedding kind of those accessibility conversations? And again, like a key thing that I think you said there was around the culture. Like, how do you embed it from a cultural point of view so that it's embedded in those early stage conversations, definitely. And it's interesting, so both of you obviously you're describing different experiences in terms of the journey that your organizations are going on. And again, just to come back to you, Brandy, on that, what do you think have been the biggest drivers in terms of driving that from the business to push for accessibility and to make sure that is something that's at the heart of what you're doing?
I mean, I don't think there's like one answer for where I work. I think the biggest thing is that we're a utility.
Yeah.
So amongst other things, we have in our mission, we have to deliver the promise of the digital age, like to our user base, and our user base are Americans, all Americans. So, if we instead of, framing the needs of users with disabilities as like other or compartmentalized, if you just frame them as like human people that are trying to use a service, people kind of snap out of that sort of like reflex of making it, well, like, I don't want, like, I think people are protective when you raise challenges. Everyone kind of wants their solution to work. So when you start to poke holes in a solution, like, oh, it may not work for like this user group, I think there's like a little bit of like deep feedback resistance or change resistance. So you want to kind of like, is this an edge case? Like, is this something that's really going to happen? Will this really affect people? And in that conversation, you forget like that what you're talking about are like are human people with given circumstances that cannot be changed. So what has to change in that relationship is the drawing or the experience, like not the end user person that's going to interact with it. So what I try to do is find like different ways of introducing that conversation, reframing it for the individual. There isn't like a way of having that conversation that works for everybody, since every every person is different.
Yeah.
So different tactics and different ways of framing the conversation are different for every human. But what I try to do is just really like drive the human element to it. Some people are very numbers focused. You can make those humans and aggregate them into dollars. And some people are very end user experience focused. And some people are very one-to-one empathetic. Like you have to make it a real person, or you have to put it in their personal context and give them like the particular challenge we're talking about may not be a challenge that the audience can empathize with, but you can make one that they would empathize with. So, if we're talking about like a visual disability and your partners don't have a visual disability, you can talk to them about a temporal disability and a time when they had trouble interacting with something due to like an injury or an illness. And that can, for some people, like unlock empathy.
Yeah. So again, from what you're saying, it's not a one size fits all solution. It's about understanding who it is that you're communicating with and what is it that's going to motivate and drive them individually.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst case scenario is you can go to like a legal place and a regulatory place with it. But my experience, especially when I first joined this organization, is that's kind of where we were when I started. The conversation was always like, at the end of the day, like we've got to fill this check, and like that's not going to get us where we were. My experience of that is like that wasn't getting us where we wanted to be, which is like having the conversation earlier and like building a partnership. So if you kind of like continue to frame it as like we're a check against established work, then you're just kind of furthering that relationship. And in some contexts, that may be the right relationship. But for us, it really isn't.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Heather, what's your thoughts there on what Brandy was just saying, and what's your experience been in terms of understanding and thinking about what drives the organization?
Yeah, so when we first started talking about accessibility at Skyscanner, it was a surprise to people that we were excluding people we didn't know we were at the time. So that was a really interesting observation, and actually being able to share that with people, we are excluding folk here, was a real game changer. I think one of our an ethos of Skyscanner is to be traveler first. So that means making what we do available to everyone. So when we talk in those terms, and I can prove that actually we're not quite able, that people in these communities aren't able to use us, it was a shocking reality. And I guess from a commercial point of view, when I'm talking to like the exec team, I'll talk about growing our audience size, improving the loyalty of our users, particularly disabled people. When they find something that works, they tend to stick with it because there's so much bad stuff out there, and it's such a difficult, awful experience a lot of the time. There's a lot of reasons. Brand equity also is a big one for us. It's a really positive thing to be doing. So these are the kind of exec type arguments I would have if I'm talking to designers and developers. I think it's really enough to show them someone struggling with what they've done. And again, it's that not knowing, and it's showing them someone isn't able to do this because we've done this and this. They desperately want to know how to fix that problem. As soon as you bring it, as Brandy was saying, make it human and make it about somebody can't do, or we're blocking somebody from doing, it does change everyone's perspective. It's hard to put it into money terms. I know, Brandy, you were saying putting it into figures. For me, I do find that quite difficult, but I have to say that, when we make accessible products, it's everyone that benefits. You've got a simpler UX, you've got a simpler, more correct build, so that everyone is going to benefit from that. And I think when that's clear to see, when you can start proving those things, then you're definitely on the right path, and people will listen. The legal thing, I think, is a little bit different for us in the UK. There are laws, yes, but they're not as strict as the American laws, and sometimes that's a negative thing. Sometimes, I wish it was. But at the same time, I think Brandy's right that it's definitely better to come from that cultural viewpoint, get people really wanting to do it rather than having to. I think it just makes everything easier and a lot nicer to work on as well when it's something positive like that rather than the negative.
Yeah, definitely. I think something that you the point you started to make was around, I guess, identifying that within an organization there are so many different types of people, and with, I guess, different, again, everyone individually has their own different goals and needs that they're trying to achieve within a company. So the way that you would communicate with, let's say, C-suite might be very different to how you're communicating with designers, engineers, etc. People a bit more potentially on the ground. And something else I think we wanted to explore was, what sort of tactics or techniques have you found kind of have had the greatest influence really in helping to educate and to get other people to buy into accessibility?
So, well, for us, I think the number one best thing to do is to show someone struggling with with your product. So that involves testing with real disabled people. We did this very early on with screen reader users, and it was just block, and it's horrible to watch when you're the cause of that frustration and pain. And then if we do a bit of user testing, take a little video of that, and then share that with people. A lot of people weren't aware of what screen readers were, and so you're educating at the same time. But that was really powerful. I use that tactic actually quite a lot. So in training as well, I'll show people using screen readers and struggling, and it really gets the message home. I'd say that one of the other things that's been a huge win was we ran some empathy labs, and we did that in our Glasgow, Edinburgh, and London offices. So we set up different stations around the room, and we simulated disabilities through a number of ways. We had vision impairment goggles, we used software, and I always have to say, caveat this with, there's nothing better than talking to a real disabled person and hearing their true story. But doing it this way, it was a really quick way for everybody to come into the room throughout the day, sit down at these stations, and seriously, within minutes, light bulbs were going, I could see them, light bulbs going off above people's heads, not having understood that this could be a problem for some people, realizing the difficulties, really starting to try to feel it for themselves. And no, it's nothing like being in the real situation, but it's a quick way of having some idea, or even just of knowing that it's not easy for everyone. People were leaving that room with the mindset of, all right, what can I do to help? And if you're running a program, that's what you want to hear. You want people keen to actually make a change. So for us, that was a huge win, and you can set that up really, really easily. A couple of different computers, a couple of phones, the set of vision impairment goggles, and it's a quick, easy way. Super effective.
Yeah, no, it sounds incredibly powerful. Definitely. How about you, Brandy? What have you found works well?
For designers and for developers who are actually going to draw the thing or build the thing, I try to, with the accessibility team, especially when it's a team we don't know very well, and when we're new in our relationship with them, we try to talk through ways to resolve the issue without solving it for them, because we don't want to take away their agency. One experience that we have that happens repeatedly, especially when it's an agency partner, we don't want to put ourselves in a relationship where we're marking up other people's designs. We've been there before. We went through a couple years of that because we relied on agencies so much for our first couple of years to do a lot of our design work. They would just submit things and we would mark it all up. And that just means you're going to get more of that. So we really have to teach people what they can do or what the challenge is. A good example is data visualizations. We use data visualizations a lot. So if someone who's more artful in their process or very visually oriented draws a data visualization, they might, in effort to achieve a minimal aesthetic, they might remove lots of key points of the actual data visualization, favoring the graphic over the content of it. So in the end, it can actually make everybody better data designer if we talk through like data design. So we're not actually talking about like the visual design as much as we're talking about like, is this like even the right way to visualize the data set you're talking about? And we'll get into the like, you know, hierarchy of it and less about the like, did it or did it not pass the WCAG? So whenever I frame, I mean, that's long-winded, but like the way that I try to approach it with designers is there's twofold. There's the hard rules from the WCAG, like absolutely meet this contrast, absolutely have labels. Like there are very few things that are absolute.
Yeah.
The rest is about like, you know, how would you resolve the issue? As a user with cognitive issues, I might have trouble interpreting this and why. Does this read order follow cleanly? Can I see hierarchy at a glance? Like, what are some questions that you have that a user might ask themselves, and try to put it that way first before we get into like the little bitty like, oh, that doesn't meet contrast, that button needs a label. That stuff is easy and you can do that later, but trying to like teach them first to kind of feel why a pattern is tricky.
Yeah, that makes
Also
complete sense.
nice if we can provide them with tools to help them do these things as well. I know that we've been working on things like Stark and things that they can use easily in the tools that they are using, so contrast checkers, and we've just introduced a set of accessibility annotations for them to mark up their designs before they send them over to the development teams, and that's really helping, even if it just starts off a conversation, because not all of our development teams are fully trained up on this. So just even to say, okay, well, what does that mean? And then they have a chat, and then even if it's not done straight away, it started that conversation, and that is finding that is really, really helpful. In Figma, there's heaps of shared resources for that, for different annotation sets that designers can use, tap into.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
One thing that I'm getting kind of excited about in our maturity is now we're starting to think about being more creative and expressive in our alt text. So, you know, once we're getting out of like, okay, like things work like foundationally, like buttons work, pages are being read, stuff like that. Okay, well, in our imagery, we don't use imagery a lot, but like when we do, if you're a non-visual person or a person using a screen reader, you know, our alt text is still like phone, person with phone. And so one of the last conversations we had at our accessibility summit was from our blind testing users who are also employees, who were like, you know, I like descriptions. You know, I want to like understand. So we had a really great and constructive conversation. Like, why would you use adjectives and adverbs like to a visual person that you wouldn't use for a non-visual person? So like, can we start to bring those things into our alt text? And for us, that means like changing our workflows, because copywriters don't have anything to do with alt text today.
Yeah.
So that's changing the scope and creating new opportunities for copywriters and content strategists on the team. And that's really exciting from a like design resourcing and workflow perspective. It means like more different kinds of work for people.
Yeah, it's great. And that copy should be written in the same tone of voice as any visible copy. It should be part of the brand and expressing the brand in any, you know, in exactly the same way.
Yeah. But, so when you think about a screen reader reading something, like, so we're creating a personality for our digital assistant. We've spent all this time and money and effort on its voice and tone and how it speaks to you, only for like the screen readers to be like, headline, person, man with phone, button, tap button, click now. Like, it's just, you know, why would we not want also our brand to extend to, you know, we can't affect the voice of your screen reader. We can't affect the words that we use and have them sound on brand.
Yeah, that's a huge opportunity. Yeah, that's really, really interesting that you're moving and thinking in that space at all. Yeah. So there's so much that we could cover, and there's so much that we could talk about today. I know that between us we could chat for hours on this topic. We have in the past, but to be kind of just to start to sum up really, and I'm going to be strict with you both. What would be, I imagine, you know, somebody who's coming into their organization wants to be that advocate for accessibility, what would be your top advice, you know, a one-liner takeaway for them as they go through that journey and they start to try and help their organization think more from an accessibility point of view?
Ooh, well, a one-liner. Okay. Can I explain my one-liner after I've said my one-liner? I would say feel it, understand it, and do it. So by feel it, I mean do that user testing, check it out for yourself. What can it be like for people? Understanding it is just educating yourself and knowing how to fix the problems. And doing it is actually, yeah, find that low-hanging fruit. Like the alt text example for Brandy, alt text is not hard to firstly write or include in something, or a missing label is not hard to fix. Find that low-hanging fruit and do it, and keep doing it and keep talking about it. It should never go away. It'll never stop, so you just have to keep going on and on.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Brandy, same thing to you. What's your one-liner?
I would just say like collaborative mindset.
Yeah.
So try to think about yourself as an advocate and having a conversation with the other person to make other people advocates. You know, it's not your job to like regulate them or to mark up other people's work. It's your job to like help get everybody to be able to intuit and work through the problem.
Yeah. Well, Brandy, Heather, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredibly valuable discussing and talking to you both today. Again, I know we could talk about this for hours. Another time we'll make that happen. There's been so much to take away. But right now I'm going to hand us back to Nicholas, who should have some questions from our audience, and hopefully we can continue that conversation.